Okay, everyone. Physical development in infancy and toddlerhood. I don't know if this corresponds with your chapter 4. Some of these notes are from a previous text. But you should always look for the chapter heading when referencing any notes or anything like that. So that's what we'll talk about first. So there's a dramatic amount of growth that occurs in the first year. A baby's height and weight doubles or even increases by as much as 75% in the first year or two. Lots of growth. Babies need lots of calories, lots of stimulation. We'll talk about all that. There are some individual differences. Not every baby is born at the same weight. Some babies will gain a little bit more, some babies will gain a little bit less, but those are some averages. So again, growth is dramatic, and the physical changes, ability-wise, are also extremely dramatic. So babies go from, not really being able to move much outside of their arms and legs to being able to fully pull themselves up and fully sit upright and even walk into the early parts of their second year, sometimes later parts of their first year. Growth in general tends to happen with this cephalocaudal, proximal distal, sort of in this way. The cephalocaudal says that basically growth starts at the top and develops as you go down. So babies are generally a little bit better with their hands than they are with their feet. Also, the center of their body tends to develop from the center out. So they're better with their trunk strength. That's really the first thing that develops. So babies can sit upright and pull themselves over. And then their arms, and then eventually they get better with their fingers, and we'll see how that, particularly the finger dexterity, improves in the early years. Just a quick review of the nervous system. So remember, those neurons are those nerve cells. The synapses are those tiny little gaps between each of the nerve cells where those neurotransmitter, those chemical messages, travel back and forth between the neurons across that synaptic gap. Just a quick review again. Babies are developing their this myelin sheath while they're postnatally, so not just prenatally but after birth. And this is really one of the reasons why babies need a lot of fat. Their brains need fat, their bodies need fat to help with their nervous system development. So if you've had a newborn or a baby, once the baby can start to drink cow's milk or other sorts of animal milk other than breast milk or formula, you want that milk to be a whole milk so that they're getting that fat. Nowadays, another thing that's popular for baby food is avocados, which was certainly not popular when I was a baby or even my daughter was a baby, but in the last 10 years or so, that's become a really popular food with babies because it has a lot of that good fat without some of the bad fat that, later on can be harmful to heart health and things like that. All right. So just a quick review of the primary neurotransmitters. Norepinephrine is involved in alertness, certainly something that's important. Dopamine, also sleep, mood, and attention. Variations or abnormal levels of dopamine can result in some serious conditions. Serotonin, also very important for sleep, mood, attention, learning, also tends to be associated with depression. And the endorphins are those natural painkillers that the body produces, and babies produce these as well. So just a quick review of neurotransmitters. All right, so in the same manner that the body develops, the brain develops primarily sort of center out and back to front. So this section of the brain is not fully developed in babies. And in fact, this very front section we won't even be addressing until late adolescence, is prefrontal cortex. But babies need, good brain development, good stimulation, good nutrition in their early years for solid brain development. This prefrontal cortex that we talk about, this will develop all the way from preschool, and it sort of finishes developing in adolescence and even into early adulthood. It's a very important, this whole top part of the brain is our cerebral cortex. And that's kind of thought to be the human part of the brain. You know, it's our consciousness and the things that we remember, and planning and reasoning, problem solving. Some of these skills are seen in animals, obviously, but a lot of these skills are primarily human type abilities. There's a lot of controversy about the left brain, right brain idea or theory. In general, what we know about the brain is that it's highly integrated, that, you know, we're not really ruled by the left side or the right side. If you can find any research articles about this or any new information, that might be an interesting discussion topic. Some of you, you know, may have sort of always thought you were a left hemisphere kind of person or a right brained kind of person. Remember that the left side of the body controls, the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. Okay, so sometimes that is associated with handedness also. Some people are ambidextrous. But again, if you wanted to bring that up as a topic in discussion, that's an area, that's something that you could bring up as an alternate to some of the things that I propose in the discussion section. The brain is very plastic, which means it's malleable. It changes dramatically with experience. Later, we'll talk a little bit about how the brain can change as a result of trauma. And the brain can also be repaired to a certain degree and repair itself and kind of reroute some of those pathways where messages are transmitted. So one of the controversies, or one of the questions I believe that's in the discussion section, one of the things in the discussion section is the question about this baby Einstein. Here's an article link discussing the baby Einstein videos and some of the problems that came about as a result of this. This is a link to an example of the baby Einstein videos. Now, the problem with baby Einstein, it's not inherently a bad thing to have these videos available for children or infants even. The controversy surrounded around the claims that the company was making, that, you know, this would make your baby an Einstein. If you look at this example video here, you'll see the little puppet show that the video plays. I myself used these with my daughter when she was an infant. I would put on, you know, one 30-minute or 23-minute, however long they lasted, program in the sort of late afternoon, so I could have a couple of minutes to myself to make dinner, make her dinner, that kind of thing. And she loved it. She absolutely loved watching these. We did, you know, try to keep her viewing time to a minimum, which is certainly important. But this was just, you know, kind of a mother's helper little thing or parent helper little thing that would buy me a couple of minutes to do something. Sleep is extremely important at all stages, but particularly for infants. They're growing so much, their brains are developing so much. In the first few months, babies will regulate their sleeping a little bit. They'll start to get on a sort of 2-hour time schedule where they'll sleep for, you know, not quite 2 hours, and then they need to eat. Eventually, and that repeats for the full 24 hours. And then eventually they sort of stretch out that period of time, and they can go longer periods of time asleep. They spend more time eventually awake during the daylight hours and sleeping at night. By age 2, babies are sleeping significantly less, from a total of 18 hours a day to about 12 hours a day. There is some variability here. Some babies need more sleep than others. There's, you know, a reasonable range, and then there's a little bit of variability in that. So here you see just in the early months up to age 2, sleep, babies spend a lot of time in sleep. They spend a lot of time in REM sleep. Um, and this is about the average sleep needs for this age group. So if you're in this age group or this age group or this age group, you can see this is the total amount of sleep. Most adults spend about 20% of their sleep in REM sleep, give or take. A lot of things can depend on this. Sleeping habits, alcohol consumption, other drugs, prescription and non-prescription, can affect REM sleep. Preventing SIDS is obviously an extremely important thing in the first 2 years of life. Primarily the first year, 6 months is really the highest, when the highest rate of SIDS occur in that stage of life. So babies should be put on their backs to sleep. Nothing should be in the crib area. These are two little bolsters that we put next to Maddie while she was sleeping. These aren't really necessary. She was just a newborn in this stage. These are okay. No pillows, no blankets, no stuffed animals. And babies should also spend a lot of time on their tummies developing that trunk strength. So this tummy time helps develop their back strength, their neck strength, and is beneficial. Pacifiers have also shown to be helpful. Don't make the mistake that I made and try to force them on your baby. Maddie did not like hers. She would spit them right out. But there has been some link to improving or decreasing SIDS rates. The other things that are really important is no smoking in the home. Even an individual wearing clothing that smells like smoke has been linked to an increase in SIDS. So babies should be on their back, nothing in their beds, no smokers in the home or around the baby, all to decrease risk of SIDS. If you have not heard this acronym before, this stands for Sudden Infant Death Syndrome. Just some other things that are important for early growth. Some of it depends on heredity, but after birth, and before birth, nutrition, prenatal nutrition is important. After birth, babies are either breastfed or bottle fed or both. And babies can be overfed. They should be, again, on that very early on, typically a 2-hour schedule where they kind of need to eat every 2 hours. And they spend most of their time sleeping in between. Childhood malnutrition is still a major concern around the world for children of every age. So good nutrition is very important for growth. Breastfeeding, some of the benefits of it, it does have, kind of exactly the right amount of fat and protein and all the other nutrients that children get or that children need. Also, it's free. That's usually one of the major advantages. And babies do get some protection from disease, particularly in the early first few days after birth from that breast milk, or it's also called colostrum in the first early days after birth. Just quickly, breastfeeding is not always an option. There are some conditions, both physical and otherwise, that can make breastfeeding difficult or impossible. And so there's certainly many formula choices for parents to make that are very well balanced, and there are programs to help with payment if parents need for that formula feeding. A quick review of learning, operant conditioning and learning. I'm going to put up a whole folder for this. This will be an optional folder that you'll see pop up on Blackboard. But when we are talking about operant conditioning, just remember that anything that increases the possibility of behavior happening again, that's an reinforcer, and punishment decreases the likelihood that something will happen. And we'll talk more about reinforcement and punishment and how it can shape behavior later on in life. Often we see these sort of advertisements or studies done about what infants prefer. And how do we know this? How do we know when infants prefer something or when they recognize something? This is a little video that will show you how researchers use habituation to study attention in infants. It's kind of interesting. The first couple minutes of the video are interesting, and then it sort of gets very repetitive, so you don't necessarily have to watch the whole thing, but here's the link to that at the top of the page. Babies are imitators. Babies and children are imitators. It's a very important part of how they learn. So again, I have some little illustrative videos for you about imitation and how that happens as children grow. Probably one of the most common example that I use, I had a friend growing up who was adopted, and on the phone you couldn't tell the difference between my friend and her adoptive mother. Even though there was no biological relationship, her style and manner of speaking was so similar to her mother's, and this was all based on imitation, what she observed throughout her development, and she had picked up on her mother's very similar way of talking. So, children are imitators. If you've ever said a bad word in front of a child and they repeat it, of course. So that's just another example of how children can imitate. So it's many times something that's important to keep in mind with young children. Gross motor development. So this is sort of the large muscles of the body. So it involves in things like crawling and standing and walking and sitting up and rolling over and those sorts of things. Fine motor development involves those more sort of particular movements like finger pinching and, things like that. The sequence that children develop physically is fairly uniform, so one step after another, typically in a range of a couple of weeks, really, in the first year to two. And this is something that pediatricians will watch very closely to see how the child's motor development is progressing. Sometimes delay in motor development can indicate a problem, whether it's genetic or environmental. So again, that's another reason for good early childhood health care and possible intervention. As with many things, the earlier the intervention and the correction can occur, the better. So when babies are developing a skill, several things have to happen. So they first of all have to have the nervous system development, the physical development, to be able to do some of these skills like sitting up or rolling over or crawling. Also, the baby's body has to be able to have the muscular development. So something like an injury can delay this. If a child has fractured a bone or something like that and has to wear a cast, that can impede development a little bit. You've probably heard the phrase before that children are resilient. And yes, a simple injury, a common injury that may delay development a little bit, babies or young children will pretty easily overcome that obstacle. They may require so as well as what are the child's goals, what motivates babies. So many times when babies are learning to crawl, you may put an animal, a stuffed animal or something in front of them and kind of pull it away to motivate them. Environmental supports, of course, opportunity and stimulation. So babies need room to crawl or roll over or run or walk and play, and space to do that, and the support and stimulation from a caring adult. All of that helps support their motor development. There can be some cultural variations in motor development. Some cultures carry their babies more than others. Some cultures talk to their babies more than others. So this, may affect development a little bit, just the rate of when that development happens or how that development happens. But overall, there's generally very little variance with those early differences. Some of the milestones, babies will do this pre-reaching. This is when they are sort of aiming for something, trying to get to something. Another one that's a major milestone is transferring objects from one hand to the other, that coordination that's required of that, as well as the pincer grasp. That's a very important skill to develop where babies can pinch little objects and pick them up, and generally babies do what babies do, which is to put them in their mouth. So that's an early skill that they develop that helps them with early feeding for themselves, so they can pick up little Cheerios or, pieces of properly cut up fruit or vegetables or something like that, or even meat, and put it in their mouth. Hearing is developed, from prenatally. Babies can hear in utero, and typically at birth can identify the voices that they've heard commonly. They do recognize different types of music from a very early stage, and playing music before birth, so prenatally and postnatally, has shown to have a lot of benefits for babies. It actually doesn't really matter what kind of music you're playing. Obviously before bedtime or sleep time, maybe you want to stick to something a little more soothing. And obviously be mindful of volume. Babies will hear better than adults, and so the music shouldn't be played too loudly. But now their vision is not as well developed. It does develop rapidly as after birth, but babies at birth do not see very well at all. They start to develop the ability to focus around 2 months. They will see much better up close than far away. Far away, they don't really see much of anything except for blurs. They see some colors. At 4 months, they develop better color vision. And as they grow into the 6-month to 7-month age, they get better at scanning and following objects in front of them, and a little bit better at depth perception, which is something we'll look at in a second. So they can see things moving, they can see depth perception, or they can evaluate depth perception as they get a little bit older, and this is important for crawling. This video here will illustrate how researchers measure when babies can perceive depth in front of them, so when they develop depth perception. This video, and typically it's on track with about when babies are crawling, which is a good thing, as you'll see in this video. Again, babies see primarily up close in the beginning. They prefer looking at faces. They prefer typically their primary caregiver's face. They can start to distinguish between faces of different individuals. If you've seen some of those videos where even older children, if they a parent or a caregiver has a beard and then shaves that beard. We had this experience with my daughter when my daughter was much older. My husband had a beard and a full head of hair, and went in the basement, shaved his head, shaved the beard, came upstairs, and my daughter cried. She didn't recognize him. So, babies and children don't always love surprises, especially when it has to do with people that they're very close to. So maybe a minute of preparation would have been beneficial for our daughter. Okay, so that's it for physical development. We will move on to the next unit in the next video.